hope you get out of this talk is that Catholics aren't boring. So in order for you never to be bored again, I'm going to give to you the definition of boring. So pay attention. Boring is answering a question that no one is asking. It's like what parents, when they're just talking and kids are like, I don't care what you're talking about. This makes no sense to me. What we've got to do is make sure that our faith is constantly asking questions, constantly, ready for this, questing the author. And why? Because if you don't quest the author, which requires humility, then you will simply in life be questioning authority. And people who question authority, it's the same root words, quest the author, question authority. People who question authority, they're annoying. They're just annoying people. There was one time I was driving to the mall to go Christmas shopping, and I don't like that at all. Because I'm a guy, I wear black. So Christmas and fashion, that stuff doesn't mean anything to me. And there was only one parking spot, and it was right next to this car to an owner who I knew I would not like because of the bumper stickers. There were political bumper stickers. There were gross bumper stickers. There was one that said, "Get your rosaries out of my ovaries." Yeah, and my first thought was, gross. I mean, that's not where rosaries belong, right? I mean, but I know what they're trying to say. Keep God out of my personal, my private, even my intimacy, or even sexual life. And I'm thinking, okay, that's fine, but the one that really annoyed me was the one bumper sticker that just simply said, question authority. And I just wanted to wait for that person to come back and say, what authority do you have to make me question authority? Do you hear? The problem is that everyone wants to play authority, but they are not the author. And here's what I'm asking you to do then, couples, and anyone investigating a potential relationship. Become theologians. You must become theologians. And a theologian is someone who practices theology. And theology is an interesting word. It is a combination of two words, theo, of God, logos, which means the word, or where we get the word logic. Theo, the logic of God. And the idea of marriage is purely theological. God is the author of marriage. And theologians will know that their married life is the sacrament that gets you to heaven. Your husband, what women? Your husbands are going to be the source of your sanctification. Because the only way you can get to heaven is if you carry your cross. And your cross has a name. You see, one of the big struggles about marriage is that we aren't theologians willing to put together the pieces of what makes marriage. So let me help you to become true theologians. You ready? A theologian is someone who practices something called Gestalt. Gestalt is a mathematical term and also a philosophical term. Gestalt has an equation, and if you want the recipe for a good marriage, pay attention to the equation of a good marriage. And the equation is this: the whole is greater than the total sum of parts. Let me explain that again. The whole is greater than the total sum of parts. The total sum of parts could be like a box of puzzle pieces. You got the total sum of parts. The whole is when you put the pieces together. And when I was a child, again, I know you might be surprised because I come across as very shy when I speak. shy and timid and humble. And so when I was a child, I was actually a little precocious, and so to keep me occupied, my mom and dad gave me a box of puzzle pieces that was like 1 billion pieces, you know, to make the picture. And I would be done in 20 minutes. And my mom would be so impressed until she saw what I did. You see, if the pieces didn't fit, I found scissors and made them fit. And what do you get at the end of that process? A mess. Something completely other than what the author intended. Which is why in order to become a theologian, you have to be patient enough to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Folks, that basically means in order for you to have a good relationship with your spouse, you've got to be patient. Be careful. Because this patience is rooted in the verb pati. So the word patience from the verb pati, patior, passio, passionis, is where we get the word passion. And people are like, oh yeah, I want some of that in my marriage. Until you realize what the word pati really means. It's the verb that means to suffer. That's why people who are passionate are people who are willing to suffer. That's why the word patience is the same root as that's why people in hospitals are called because they're suffering. And so when we say, following the inspiration of St. Paul, that love is patient, love is kind, love is patient comes first. Because love can't be proven in a microwavable minute. Love is proven with a crock pot. It takes a long time. It takes us a minute to fall in love. It's going to take a lifetime to prove love. And so what I've got to do is make sure that if you are going to have a good relationship, then you're going to do something that God is encouraging you to do. Feed your loved ones. Feed your loved ones with food, but food really will stand for F, fidelity, O, obedience, O, opportunities, D, discernment. Let's go through fidelity real quick, because the last time I checked, when couples get married, they do not vow perfection. They vow fidelity, right? Fidelity presumes something. Fidelity presumes someone or you might become unfaithful. Fidelity presumes you're not perfect and that you will make mistakes. Fidelity presumes that you will be humble enough to say, I love you, those 3 words, with 3 other words. And you know what they are? I am sorry. And if you really are faithful, you will say, I love you with 3 other words. Words that Jesus said from the cross. I forgive you. You see, I think fidelity is sometimes limited to piety. And fidelity is pious for sure, because you look at your loved ones, whether it be your husband, your wife, or your children, and you see them as precious gifts to be held with great esteem. But fidelity also knows that these things, these people, they do not belong to you. They are given to you as gifts from God, and it is your job to nourish and nurture them, not to be the Lord of them. And so fidelity is what our relationships are hungering. And if you think about it, if there's one place where you can be faithful, you know where that is? The dinner table. How many of you have ever had a Thanksgiving miracle and had moist turkey? I've got recipes, all right? So there is hope. But could you imagine eating that moist turkey alone? Or eating that delicious meal with someone you're in a fight with? Unfortunately, We have limited fidelity to just this pious act. And fidelity is hard work. Fidelity presumes you will fall. But fidelity also presumes I will get up and I will try again. That is why as a priest I have the privilege of offering people fidelity through the forgiveness of sins, because we all fall. Couples, technically, you are the ministers of your sacrament. You have almost essentially a sacramental-ish power to absolve the other. If you're going to be humble enough to examine your conscience and say how I've offended you and God. Because the fact is, in the institution of marriage, the couple, man and wife, confer the sacrament to each other. Do you know that? If you confer the sacrament of love to each other, then you should be very quick. As the church is so generously fast to offer forgiveness, you ought to be offering forgiveness to each other. Or obedience. So you got fidelity. Let's talk about obedience. Now, a lot of times people think that obedience are things that only priests and religious have to offer, right? That we have a superior that we've got to always say yes to. But that's not obedience. Can I tell you who the true obedient people are? Husbands to their wives, and wives to their husbands. That's obedience. The word obedience, obedire, ob is like the Latin that kind of says towards what needs to be heard, and the word dire, audire, to listen, strangely has the verb dire in it because that's the verb that means to speak. So obedience is tending towards that which is spoken. All right? That's kind of what the word obedience really means. Unfortunately, the devil is trying to speak to you too. And it's very easy to listen to the devil because the devil is everywhere, even here in your hearing. And what we've got to do is clarify, who are we listening to? Who are we feeding our ears and our minds with? And you got to become better theologians, folks, to make sure that you can discern. And listening is not an easy thing to do in today's world. Just a quick story about how a woman was arguing with me on a plane, an international flight. 10 hours long, sitting there. And at one point she says, "Are you a Catholic priest?" And I looked at her and I said, "I could be Anglican. I could be Anglican." I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Well, why can't priests get married? Why can't women become priests? Why do we deny that Jesus was actually in love with Mary Magdalene?" And I looked at her and I said, "Lady, do you want to ask me a question? Because if you want to ask me a question, just ask. But if you want to pick a fight, bring it." That's what I said. And at that moment, I kind of felt the presence of the Blessed Mother and the angels and saints, because I felt the Blessed Mother literally smack me upside my head. And the angels and saints going, "He just got smacked on the head." And then I literally almost heard in the consciousness of my heart, if you really are a Catholic priest, and if you really are my child's son, brother, and minister, then you will do what my son Jesus did. And my son was willing to listen. Suffer, yes, definitely. But listen. Listen. And we don't do that. Oh, opportunities. Why? Because we are given the entire world. We are given the body, blood, and soul divinity of Jesus Christ. We have the opportunity to get to heaven. I just need you to become pilgrims, because we have the opportunity to be Catholic. And the word Catholic means universal. But unfortunately, we sometimes limit Catholicism to being parishioners. And folks, Parishioners are great, but you can't be parochial only. So even if you don't go with any of me on my amazing trips that are not only affordable, they are fun. I still need you to be a pilgrim, to be on a search. Take advantage of opportunities the church has to offer you. And in a way, I'm preaching to the choir because all of you some of you came from very far away to come out here because you're pilgrims seeking the opportunity to get to heaven. But if you are one of those people who had to get dragged out here, I get it. Be at least a pilgrim and try going to another Catholic parish on occasion. Just leave your envelopes at the church where you're registered, okay? Or how about being a pilgrim and attending a different Mass time? Oh, how about this? How about being a pilgrim and sitting in a different pew? In other words, take advantage of the opportunity that God has given to you and stop being boring. Ask yourself this question: how am I getting to heaven? And where are the rest stops where I'm experiencing God's grace along the way? Get out there, folks, and see this world and be impressed with how we as Catholics have changed the landscape for the better. And now the last ingredient, discernment. Discernment, which is so key to good relationships for your family, for your future. Gosh, discernment will help you to make good decisions. So the only way we can make good decisions is if we are practicing the art of discernment. That means understanding all sides of the story. Doesn't that oftentimes look like a kid with a box of puzzle pieces and trying to see how they all fit together? Taking time, sometimes trial and error, sometimes taking that piece and putting it off to the side and realizing, gosh, this issue, I don't know all the facts yet, so let me at least keep it there until I get a bigger picture. You see, theologians are all about becoming discerners, understanding what God is trying to say to them. And God has so much to say that we can't handle the truth in one bite. We have to be taking little niblets of truth throughout our entire life, which is why the book Epic Food Fight is all about a bite-sized history of salvation. Every day we need to be taking a bite of faithfulness, a bite of obedience, opportunity, and literally every day, every moment, are we discerning so that our decisions lead to life and not death. Food, it kind of is a lot more than you thought. And it could be the stuff that nourishes your relationship.
So about a year ago, National Geographic came out and proclaimed the gender revolution. That here we are at this point in time, this is the gender revolution. And on the cover, it had two alternative covers of its magazine. And on the first cover was a young child dressed in pink, and this is Avery. Avery was born a boy, and his mother says when he was about 2 or 3, he started playing with girl things, and then finally the moment of truth came when he was about 4 years old. She was shopping in Target with him, and he wanted to go to the girls section, and he looked at her and he said, "Mom, you think I'm a boy, but really I'm a girl inside." And his mom said, the light bulb went on, and from then on we started treating Avery as a girl. So this is Avery, a transgender child, born a boy, now claims to be a girl. The other cover shows a spectrum of genders, of different identities. So we have in that photo people who identify as straight, as gay, people who are born male and identify as female, born female, identify as male, people who don't identify as either. They say they're gender queer or they're non-binary, things like that. Interestingly enough, in that group, there is not one woman who's happy to be a woman, which I thought was very revealing about this whole movement. Many of us first became aware of the whole transgender thing when Bruce Jenner came out as Caitlyn. Or some of us may have been sort of clued into it shortly before that, when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of same-sex marriage. Actually, I think many people thought with the same-sex marriage decision that some of the conflict in the society would sort of calm down, that we could just all get back to doing what we do and get rid of this, that, okay, the worst is over, or not the worst, but we can all just be friends, we can all be calm. But that's not what happened. Instead, there's been an escalation, a clamor for transgender rights, and people are saying, what is going on? What is this all about? So let's understand first, if you all could switch this, let's first understand what gender means. This image of the genderbread person is often used to teach this new idea of gender. Now, most of us, for the past 20, 30 years, have colloquially used the term gender to mean the same as male or female. You fill out your gender on your license, either male or female. Really, we're talking about sex. We use it as a euphemism to mean the same as biological sex. Sex is part of who we are. We're a unity of body and soul. For gender activists, for gender theorists, for gender ideology, the understanding of gender is different. The view of the human person is different. We're fractured into all these different dimensions. So we have gender identity. Gender identity is your internal sense of being male or female. Gender expression is what you do on the outside to express who you feel you are, your clothing, your hair, your interests, things like that. Your biological sex is what you're born with, but typically activists use it to mean only your genitals, not your chromosomal identification, but your genitals. And then you have your sexual orientation, where your sexual desires tend towards distinct from romantic orientation. So you can see the human person is no longer a person. It's a person who's got all these disparate aspects, none of which need to be aligned according to gender ideology. Another common image that is used is the gender unicorn. Why this image? Well, because to some gender activists, the genderbread person looked a little too male. So they came up with the gender unicorn. Why? Because it sort of captures the idea that you can be whoever you want to be, that you have that right to self-definition. So there were some other changes made on this diagram. It's no longer just the binary male-female. It's male-female other, or your expression could be masculine, feminine, other, neither, somewhere in between. An interesting change was the change about biological sex. And you will notice when people speak now about someone's sex, in other words, how they were born, it's spoken of not as a fact, but rather as sex assigned at birth, as if the doctor and the parents sort of looked and made a guess, just kind of judged. But you really don't know. It was just kind of assigned. Maybe they got it right, maybe they didn't, because only the person knows for sure. Only the person gets to decide who they are. So these are some of the ideas that are being promoted. And the other thing about this gender unicorn, it's used often to teach young children the whole concept of gender, because it's a very cute little attractive figure. All right, gentlemen. All right, where does this leave us? It leaves us with all sorts of labels. And some of these you may be familiar with, some not. There's been a rise in the idea of being non-binary, neither male nor female. Another word up there you may or may not be familiar with is gender queer. When I was in high school, calling someone queer was derogatory. It's like, don't do that. Not so. The movement has reclaimed that word, and they use the word queer to mean anything that's not heterosexual or typical, what they would say, cisgender. In other words, a person whose body matches with their identity. So it's anyone who rejects normal sexuality and identities can claim that label, queer. So what is this all about then? If this is how the movement, the gender and sexual rights movement describes gender, what's all this stuff about transgender? Well, there is a phenomenon called gender dysphoria. It's where a person experiences distress or suffering because they perceive a disconnect or a mismatch between their physical body and how they feel about themselves. And it's a real suffering. It's not a made-up thing. People really experience that. And it's a terrible cross. What has changed is how we approach that. So gender dysphoria, now the approach of gender activists is to say, if someone's experiencing that, it's because they're telling us something. They really are the person they feel themselves to be. So rather than trying to help them become comfortable with the body they're in, we're going to give them gender-affirming therapy. That means we're going to encourage them to transition. So children as young as 2, 3, 4, 5 will be allowed to transition socially. That means if you have a toddler or a preschooler who's born a girl and says, I'm a boy, if the parents are all on board with this gender affirmation, they will say, all right, you think you're a boy? You want a haircut? Fine, we'll cut your hair. You want to go shop for clothes in the boys' department? That's fine. We'll tell your preschool teacher that you have a new name and use male pronouns. And so the child begins to live as if they really were the opposite sex. So that's social transition. It's all exterior. The problem is the things we do, we are a unity of body and mind and soul. The things we do with our bodies affects how we think of ourselves. So when we start acting a certain way and thinking of ourselves as the opposite sex, we're going to identify more strongly with that. Typically what happens in gender-affirming care is that if a child continues to say that they are actually the opposite sex, then you move on to what's called medical transition. So this is when you have a child as they've been socially transitioned for a while. Maybe people don't even realize that they were born the opposite sex. But as they're getting closer to puberty, that dysphoria, that sense of anxiety or concern or that I don't fit into the body I'm born in can escalate. So the gender therapists say, we've got a fix for that. We will put you on hormones to stop your puberty, to block you from developing. And the theory is that that gives these children a chance to sort of figure out who they are. The problem is, when you stop natural puberty from occurring, you are stopping a natural process that oftentimes resolves that difficulty, as well as there being all sorts of health issues, their height, their bone density, things like that. So besides that puberty blocking stage, that can happen at age 11, 12, and go on up until the child's in the early teens. And generally what happens is, here's this child. Imagine someone who's put on puberty blockers at age 11, let's say a boy, or a natural boy who thinks he's a girl. So he's with all the girls, and all the girls by this time are developing. They're getting breasts, their hips are widening, they're looking more and more like mature young women. And here, this individual hasn't gone through puberty at all as a male, but is feeling like they don't fit in with the girls either, because the girls are developing. So then the pressure is on to allow a child at this point to take opposite sex hormones, cross-sex hormones. And so they're prescribing them for children as young as 14. The problem here is that this is serious stuff. That means you've got, let's say, a boy who thinks he's a girl. You are going to give him estrogen. That's going to have an impact. It's going to change his body for sure. It's going to make him sterile. It changes how he thinks. It has a host of ramifications. Okay, so that's the second stage of medical transition. Then what typically happens, there used to be an age limit, a very sharp age limit of 18, before someone who felt they were transgender would be allowed to do any sort of undergo any sort of surgical procedures. The gender activists and the practitioners, there are people making money off of this. The practitioners have been pushing and pushing to get that age lowered. So now, in reading both the studies and in anecdotal accounts. And in fact, National Geographic covered a young man who went through this procedure under age 18. It's becoming increasingly common that you are having 16-year-olds go through surgeries to change their genitals. And actually, there's surgery that girls who think they're boys go through earlier too. Many of them want to get rid of their breasts. So they will have double mastectomies as young as 14. So what's the rationale? Why this push to take a child who's been confused and to medicalize it instead of working through and trying to get at the feelings of conflict and to resolve whatever's going on underneath? Why the push? Some of it is there's developed a sense among some therapists that children have this mythical wisdom that they just know who they are. Now, I had a daughter, who loved watching the movie Balto. Anyone remember that movie, Balto, about the sled dogs and stuff? You could have asked her when she was 4 who she was, and she would have said, Balto. Children think a lot of things that are not true. There isn't some mythical wisdom about all their perceptions. That's up to us adults to help them see reality. But there is this school of thought among gender therapists. What's another reason? Children who suffer from gender dysphoria typically also have many other co-occurring difficulties. A high rate of depression, high rates of anxiety. Oftentimes they have body disorders, eating disorders. So there are serious mental health issues going on. Again, real suffering that these kids are going through. So imagine being a parent of a child who's experiencing this, and you go to a therapist, and all you want as a parent is to help your child feel better. And the therapist says, oh no, you have to realize they need you to support that feeling that they are really the opposite sex, and we can help you, and just go with it. So a lot of parents get on that train out of very good instincts, but very misguided advice. Another reason is that there are some scary suicide statistics out there for people who are transgender. And so there's a school of thought that says the reason why these children, or adults, because most of the research on suicide is adults who transitioned, the reason why these suicide rates and rates of suicide attempts is so high is because there's been stigma and discrimination, and they have not been affirmed for the people they know themselves to be. And therefore, if we give that affirmation, that is how you will resolve this terrible suicide rate. The problem with that is, number one, we don't have long-term studies on that here. But there are several Scandinavian countries that have done long-term studies because of the way their medical care is structured, where they follow people who undergo sex change surgery, not just for 5 years, or not for a year, as oftentimes we see some of the early research coming out where people say, oh, everything's better, the world's wonderful because I went through this. They follow it for 10, 15, 20 years. And the scary thing is, the suicide rates are astronomical at that point. So this is not a solution. And yet, for parents whose children are struggling, it's portrayed as the solution. And what we have to remember here is nobody's talking about figuring out why these children might be suffering with this, or why an adult might be having gender dysphoria. Typically when you go to a doctor and you say, my leg's not working, they're going to try to figure out why, because the remedy is going to depend on what the problem is. If you have a broken leg, you need the fracture fixed. If you have cancer in the knee, you need the tumor excised. But you can't just impose a remedy unless you know why. And so what's happening here is, for political reasons, we've stopped looking for the reasons why. And instead, we've gone with this gender-affirming therapy, make everyone feel better, because there's a political effort to say, this is just the same as, or just as good as, or just as normal as being heterosexual, identifying with your bodily sex.
So the great breakdown of the family, especially the negligence, the absence, or just the indifference of fathers, clearly correlates with the decline in religious affiliation. And I just want to take a minute here to thank all the fathers that are here today. It shows that you have taken your fatherhood. Thank you. Yes, please. You certainly have made your fatherhood a priority, and you're here, and it shows, and that's what is important. Hold on. All right, so there was a Swiss study done in the year 2000, which is 18 years ago, so keep that in mind. And these studies, there was a lot of different studies that they looked at, and we want to just focus on three of the conclusions that they found. So the first was the mother that attends church regularly and where the father does not attend church at all. There's about a 40% retention rate of their children as adults continuing to attend church, okay? For the mother that attends church regularly and the father that attends irregularly, meaning maybe twice a year or just when it works, when the game's not on, or whatever those reasons might be, the retention rate was about 60%, where the children would still attend church as adults. The greatest one, though, was where both mother and father attended church regularly. There was a retention rate of about 75%. So if someone has 10 kids here, you can just put the math together. 7.5 out of 10, that's a good job. No, of course, these are just generalizations, and every family is going to be different, but that's a really good snapshot. And we personally think, this is our opinion, that this is an 18-year-old study, and the culture has grown tremendously, a very loud culture, and I believe that the first stat, especially if the father is not present, his voice is more or less saying he's indifferent for whatever reason, that the culture's voice will be louder, and that we think that stat would be probably a tremendous, sad retention rate. Okay, so here you go.
As a father myself, I want to talk to my kids about truth, about beauty, about goodness. I want to talk about politics and what's going on in the church, what's going on in culture right now. And I can give them all the knowledge and wisdom I think I have, but the most important thing I give them is that witness. Am I going to Mass? Am I praying? Am I sincere? If I am, they're going to embrace that. Chances are they will embrace it. If I'm not sincere, or if I'm hostile to religion, or I'm just indifferent, even if I'm in the pews, and I complain about the homily, complain about the church, or maybe I just don't say anything about it. It doesn't move me. Then I'm sending a message to them there that I'm also indifferent. So we have a huge role in passing on the faith, and primarily it's through our witness as fathers. The next of the 10 is number 3, rampant militant secularism. Secularism is everywhere. It's in media, it's in schools, and it's really, it's presenting itself as here's the world, here's the church, and if you're in the world, the church doesn't make sense. So we appear to be opposed to each other. So that's coming against us right now. Number 4 is a lack of spiritual authenticity of older generations. Just like I was talking about with the fathers. If we are Eucharistic people, if we are people set free by Jesus Christ through our baptism, and we're given the grace of the sacraments of confirmation, matrimony, the Eucharist, then we should look different than those who don't have access to that grace. And yet, generally speaking, we don't look a lot different. So where is the joy? Where is the zeal? Where is the fire? Millennials need to see that there is joy in being a Christian. There is zeal. There is a fire that's within us because Jesus Christ is alive in our lives. That needs to be seen.
Okay, number 5, the church's cultural influence has diminished. The church is sincerely just one voice among many. There's a lot of voices that are competing for their attention. The millennials really don't care. If they're not connected to the church, they're really not going to care if they view it as unimportant or not authoritative. They're going to look upon the church as yet another voice. They don't care what the church thinks. They also might not even feel that there's a need to be connected to their local parish, to their community. There's not a lot of guilt associated with that since it doesn't have an influence on them. Number 6, we find moral relativism. There is a general cultural abandonment of morality. Objective moral truth is rejected by this generation as a whole. Mantras such as obey your thirst, just do it, whatever makes you happy are the loudest voices they hear. And again, this is a generalization. We do know many people that are seeking truth. But this is the observation of this book, that the general abandonment of morality, mainly because they're not connected to an authority that tells them what's right and wrong. Number 7, intellectual skepticism. Millennials tend to embrace a philosophy that says life is about asking questions. It is not about dogmatic answers. Okay, so they don't really see one authority as having the end all. That's why the church is not an important factor in their pursuit for truth. And ultimately, truth comes from science and not from faith.
Which we don't embrace. Just want to make sure you know that. Atheism has become fashionable. I remember when I was in high school, a girl came into the, it was 9th grade literature, and she came in, and we were talking about, I was at a public school, but for some reason we were talking about God, and she came in and she just said, "I am an atheist." And she was so proud of herself. And I felt like we should applaud her. It's like, wow, good for you. But that was back in 89 or 1990. And now that we've been in schools, high schools, middle schools, and it's popular for a kid to say, "I'm an atheist." And there's kind of like a swagger about it. I'm above you. You believe in you have faith in that you can't prove that. So I am above you. I'm an atheist. What's next? Bing, bing, bing. Number 9 is the misuse of tolerance. Tolerance in a culture that's primarily relativistic in terms of morality. Tolerance is the highest of virtues. I will tolerate all behavior and all type of lifestyles, and that appears to be a virtue, whereas the vice would be judgmentalism. So I think we've all encountered that where someone says, "Don't judge me, you're being so judgy." It's because I'm making a statement to say this is right and this is wrong, and now suddenly I'm intolerant. But this is part of a millennial worldview that tolerance is celebrated. And who is probably perceived as the most intolerant would be Christianity, would be specifically the Catholic Church, because we say this is right and this is wrong. And so for a millennial, it makes coming to the church a bit of a difficulty, because they've tolerated all sorts of lifestyles and behaviors, and now they're going to an institution that appears to not tolerate. Here are the 5 keys, we say, to re-evangelizing millennials. The first is follow the incarnational principle. Okay, follow the incarnational principle. Meet people where they are. God could have revealed himself to us from up above and just shone light beams on us, but he didn't. He decided to come down and be one of us, to experience humanity, to touch us, to heal us, to weep with us, to laugh with us. He came and dwelt among us. And so we as Christians have to follow that same way. It wasn't like Jesus came as a 30-year-old man and gathered everybody in an assembly and said, "I'm going to pass on the doctrines of what we're going to call Christianity right now." He had to go and meet them where they were. He was a carpenter. He was a hardworking guy. He met them where they were. And we have to follow the same path of meeting them where they are. What's next? Authentic Christian witness is crucial. If we are passing on the truth of our faith, and again, it can't just be words, it will be seen in our actions. Pope Paul VI in 1975 wrote a document called Evangelii Nuntiandi, Evangelization in the Modern World, where he said, modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he listens to teachers, it's because they're witnesses. And that was back in 1975. And it is so true today. If we are going to reach this next generation, they have to see an authentic, quote-unquote, radical Christianity where we're living it out and there's no shame about our Christianity we live it, and we love God, and we love others, and they see it through our witness. It's marked by joy and conviction. Quite simply, we're not convincing millennials because we are not convinced ourselves, perhaps. We must be intentional about hospitality. We must be welcoming. We must reach out. If we see a young adult in our parish that doesn't know somebody, we have to break free from our own little Catholic clique, and we've got to go and engage and have discussions and invite them into our homes. We have to reach out with hospitality.
All right, so we want to highlight the beauty in the world, creation, culture, and Christianity. We talk about the transcendentals, truth, beauty, goodness. We want to be able to express our faith through these transcendentals. We used to approach the body, the masses, through truth, and start there. And we have to we have to reach them where they are. They really are connected to beauty. They are connected to the culture. All right, so we need to look at creation. We need to celebrate those things in creation that are beautiful. We need to understand the beauty of the mountains, the outdoors, and reach them where they are. St. John Paul II was a master at this. He would take young adults out into the wilderness, camp with them, take them canoeing, kayaking, hiking, and in the evening sit around a campfire and talk about those beautiful things, what it meant to be human, what it meant to love. Would reach them where they were. For the culture, we can't be afraid of this culture. We have to be able to be well-versed in the music, the art, the literature, the films. We have to know what people are doing to be able to reach them where they are. We can't be afraid. We need to find the truth, beauty, and goodness in them. We need to be engaged. We need to be relevant. We need to enter into the discussion. We can't paint the culture as the enemy. The minute we do, we are irrelevant. In terms of Christianity, we need to tap into the beauty and goodness that is there in our Catholic faith. It is rich. We have sacred art, we have sacred liturgy, we have sacred music, we have the silence of prayer. It's such a beautiful, rich tradition we have in our Catholic faith. How many of you here have ever experienced the Holy Easter Triduum? Raise your hand if you've ever gone. How many of you here have ever invited someone to it? Good. Continue. Take the opportunity this spring to invite people to the Triduum, have them come in and see the richness of what our faith is. In general, experiencing the sacred is something they might not have ever experienced, and they might not ever get there unless they're invited to do so. So it is attractive to them, and they just need the invitation to discover that attractiveness.
All right, number 3, restore the intellectual traditions of theology, philosophy, and apologetics. Let's not dumb down the faith. Once we've won trust over, we need to give some meat. We need to actually talk about the faith, talk about faith and reason, how they are compatible. Engage in those deep discussions with those we befriend. They're hungry for the truth. They're hungry for debate, perhaps. They're hungry for discussion. We need to engage in it and in all things charity. But I think we really need to focus on apologetics. When we were first starting ministry, apologetics was really about how can we explain Catholicism to the Protestants. I'm not so concerned about that now. It's how can I explain Christianity to the atheist, to the agnostic? We need to hone our skills in philosophy, theology, apologetics. All right, number 4, proclaim the good news of salvation history.
All right, so be prepared to give a reason for your hope. 1 Peter 3:15 says, know your faith. Know why you love Jesus Christ. Be able to share that. If you know it well, you'll be able to share it well. Don't be afraid to share it. Authenticity of our witness speaks far louder than hitting them over the head with scripture or doctrine. Be an authentic person and embrace your faith and live it. For the sake of time, we'll move on to number 5, form missionary disciples.
All right, so we are called as a church to evangelize. We exist not for fundraisers, not for meetings. We exist not even for education, really. We exist to evangelize. Everything falls under that umbrella. And so we have to be intentional about how we are evangelizing. And really to evangelize, we can't just expect Bishop Zielinski and Father Fath and all the other priests in the diocese to be charged with that mission. It is their mission, but really we are the lay people who are called to go out and share that good news. So, how are we doing it? All the baptized must be given that mission to evangelize according to their state of life, according to their gifts. We are called to grow as disciples and go as missionaries, to grow and go. And if we are authentic witnesses, no matter what generation we are, it will say something to those who are not affiliated or those who are on the fence. It will say, these people have something authentic. They have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and they have a joy. And I want some of that, because I've experienced despair, I've experienced emptiness in my pursuits of happiness. But these people are different. So we as disciples need to continue to grow and have that mission to go as missionaries.
All right, a question every parish should ask themselves if this parish, your parish, did not exist, would the community notice? In other words, is our missionary zeal so strong that we're making a difference in our community? Are we present to the poor, to the marginalized, to the needy? If so, the millennials will certainly notice. They'll think it's cool. They'll think that you're awesome. And if it's not evident, they'll notice that too. They'll see both. Authenticity, again, of witness. A quick story about a parish that we adopted out in Massachusetts. The brother priest came to our priest and said, man, how do you do it financially? Do you find yourself taking care of the people in your parish more than the actual logistics of taking care of a church? And he said, no, we don't have that problem. And so the priest, Father Jonathan, started explaining what he does. He is a missionary disciple. He is in one of the roughest neighborhoods in Worcester. He goes out into the neighborhoods. He takes care of these people who are drug addicts, who are prostitutes, who are in gangs. He sees these young men who have no fathers. So what does he do? He goes out, he picks them up off the streets, calls 911, helps them get the rehab that they need. He opens his doors. The light is always on. He makes meals, and if he sees kids on the street, he yells out, dinner's ready. He is out there, he sits on his stoop and hands out granola bars every morning as the kids, knowing that they didn't have a breakfast before they went to school. He has open gym for the boys, again, a father figure for many of these boys who don't have one. He has a clothing pantry, a food pantry, and so he's present. He is there seeing the needs of the people and being that. And so many people have not just let him take the charge, but are there helping him, like our parish. You should have seen the response our parish gave. Everyone in the community that sees him, they're not Catholic. Many of the kids are not Catholic. He has Muslims, he has Jewish, he has atheists, he has Protestants. He doesn't care. He doesn't check their religious affiliation. He loves them where they are. And that is the witness, that is the light in the darkness that our church needs to be. That is the beacon of hope that we are called to be as church. And so it is up to all of us, the lay people and the clergy, to do what we can, to know what our church is, to rejoice in it, and to live it.